Hey there. Welcome to That Can't Be Right, a podcast about exploring structural wrongs, cultural oddities, and wild opinions. I'm your host, Ryan Rogan, and I'm so grateful to everyone that listened to the first 3 episodes of the season. I've received a ton of great feedback from all of you, so in the interest of self-care, I'm going to share 3 of my favorite comments. First, from my brother. She's 80% as funny as me, so that's still very funny. From one of my former classmates. I shared this with my Beyonce group chat at work. And from another very sad Texan, wow, Ken Paxton sucks more than I thought. Yeah, he does. Anyway, keep them coming. You can send the comments on Twitter and Instagram at TCBRPod. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, or if you have an idea for an episode, send me an email, thatcanberightpodcast@gmail.com. Let's get the party started. Hello, welcome to That Can't Be Right, a podcast dedicated to exploring structural wrongs, cultural oddities, and wild opinions. I am your host, Ryan Rogan. Today, I'm joined by Jenny Dial Creech, managing editor MBA for The Athletic. Prior to that, she spent 14 years at the hometown newspaper, the Houston Chronicle. Native of San Antonio, graduate of the University of Oklahoma. One son, another on the way. Way too many rescue animals. I've met one already. Yeah. And a Houston area resident. So already a top 10 guest on That Can't Be Right. All time. So Jenny, welcome to That Can't Be Right.
Thanks so much for having me. So nice to see you.
Yes. In the interest of journalistic integrity, Jenny and I go technically way back to the early 2010s. She covered my high school basketball team. She claims to remember me, and I believe her.
I do.
But I'm pretty sure I averaged and whopping 8 points.
I think you were a pretty good little rebounder, weren't you?
I tried. Rebounding and blocks. I did like blocking shots. So that was
a great team. It was a really, really good team.
Good team, good players. Some have gone on to great success in the WNBA and coaching across the city of Houston. So the Coach Robique's coaching tree is pretty expansive. So
yeah, definitely.
Unfortunately, we're not here to reminisce about my glory days. We're here to talk about college football. So if you're one of the dozens of people that follow me on social media, you know I hate when coaches fail up, whether that's just being mediocre at their job and then failing up to a new coaching position at a Big 5 school, or whether it's sweeping lots of really terrible behavior under the rug and then failing up to a coaching position with a huge salary at a Big 5 school. I hate it. Not because I hate college football or anything, but just the implications it has on others, the women on campus, the players, what the schools could do with the money that they're spending on these salaries of coaches who have long since been fired. It's not great. So a few years ago, Jenny wrote a series of articles detailing the aftermath of what happened at Baylor University during the Art Briles tenure. Because I don't remember those things as they were happening, the articles were really instructive to me. And I wanted to talk to Jenny about how college football programs are able to build and continue these toxic cultures and what that looks like. And maybe how colleges, the Department of Education, the NCAA, fans, conference leadership can fix things moving forward. So you've heard from me enough. We'll jump into the questions now. To provide some context, Jenny, can you tell me who Art Briles is?
Currently, I believe he's still a high school football coach in Texas now. Prior to that, his last college coaching job was at Baylor University. The Bears were very successful under his tenure. He's an excellent football coach. He is. He coached a Heisman winner. They never won a national championship, got really close, won, I think, 2 Big 12 titles while he was there. Certainly just really good. Prior to that, Briles coached at the University of Houston for a long time. He was a legendary high school coach in the state of Texas before that at Stephenville High School. He's had a lot of great players come through him and he's great. I mean, you were talking about a coaching tree early. His is expansive too. I mean, he has so many coaches who have coached underneath him who've gone on to success as well. So Yeah, so that's who Art Briles is, a football coach who probably would have been a Hall of Fame football coach had he not, done some of the things that he did at Baylor, which we'll get into more. But he was the man in charge of the football team when kind of everything, all hell broke loose among that team, and everything came spilling out. That led to one of the largest sexual assault scandals in college football history, and one that we're still using as an example today very frequently, unfortunately.
Hmm. And I think that leads us kind of right up to the next point. What happened?
Mhm.
What opened the floodgates to this huge scandal?
Initially, what happened was a wonderful reporter by the name of Jessica Luther and her, two of them, Dan Solomon, two of these reporters found this information, and they ended up selling this story to Texas Monthly. So Texas Monthly is actually who broke this wide open. And what they found out was that one of the star defenders on this Baylor team, someone who had just transferred from Boise State, was actually on trial for sexual assault. But he was still practicing, he was still playing, like none of this had come up. It just happened to be something they stumbled across and followed up with. And once they, it's one of those things, like once you go looking for something, you find a lot more.
Hmm.
Once that happened, it became really clear, case after case after case, as they came out, that there were several women who had accused football players of sexual assault over the years. The athletic department knew about these accusations and let the players continue to play without any kind of reprimand whatsoever, maybe a game suspension here or there, but certainly nothing that lived up to what they had done. And in the meantime, through that, several of us who started covering the story after the fact, found out that just all in all, the entire Title IX department at Baylor University was failing. Women were coming forward, and they were not being given any kind of the resources that they needed to deal this. The reports weren't being taken seriously. There was a lot of victim shaming going on. There was a lot of you shouldn't have been drinking. What were you wearing? Why were you at this party? To again sweep these things under the rug. And it was a classic case of what we see at a lot of places. If you are winning and you're really good, you can get away with a lot. And that's what was happening at Baylor. Everything there needed a rehaul. The Title IX office, the athletic department, everything, because, we're it's still ongoing. Like a lot of these suits are ongoing, but we know of at least, I think it's up in the hundreds now of women who came forward, that there are actually lawsuits for. The largest lawsuit has 52 women in it. So this is not just like a one-off kind of a thing. And we also know that it was happening under Briles' tenure for years. It wasn't, here and there. This was happening repeatedly for a decade.
And one question I have based on that was about the Title IX department. And maybe this is something we'll get to later, but how were they kneecapped by the football department, or were they just like not properly supported from the outset?
Probably a little both. I think, Title IX can be complicated, but it's really not. I mean, when it
Hmm.
when it boils down to it, Title IX means not just in sports, but across the board. If you are a university who's receiving Title IX funds from the federal government, which most are, there are some that don't, but most of them are. Baylor was getting money every year for Title IX.
Mm.
You are required to basically provide equal opportunities to every student, is what it means. And a lot of times we see that broken down into gender. You can't, it's why there's a little bit more, not completely, a little bit more equality in sports, just in terms of resources for men's and women's teams and et cetera. But it also means if you're, in this case, the way that Title IX applies to this is if you're a young woman and you go to the Title IX office and you say, I was raped at a campus party, I have two classes with my attacker, the university is required then to do something to help you out, because they need to give you the opportunity to succeed in your class the way that anyone who wasn't raped would. So therefore, it might be, switching your schedule around without it being a penalty to you, helping you get, mental health services at the student center, any kind of health services that, if it's physical, that should be covered under Title IX. Maybe it's somebody to walk you to your car. Maybe it's, you know, a week off of school to go home and see your family. Whatever it is, the university has to provide you with resources to make sure that you're taken care of so that you can succeed. They failed to do that on every front. There were women who couldn't get counseling, couldn't get approved for counseling. They couldn't even get their crime reported. I mean, the other thing about Title IX is everybody on campus working there, going to school there, particularly the people, any staff member, like, you know, the dorm officer, to the dean, everybody in between should be, if a student comes to you and says, this horrible thing happened to me, I was assaulted, they're supposed to then say, here's what you need to do. Here's where you need to go. Here's the resources available to you. Here's a number for the police department, for the university hospital. Here's where you can go to talk to, a student chaplain. Here's where you can go to talk to somebody in student services to make sure you can get your schedule changed. That was not happening either. Baylor did not even have a Title IX coordinator on the campus, period. So there was nobody even overlooking, these things that were happening. So women didn't know where to go. They didn't know who to report things to. When they did, they were just met with a lot of what we were talking about earlier, that victim shaming process. If you go forward with this, no one's going to believe you. Are you sure? We saw a lot of, it's in the student handbook that you're not supposed to be drinking. Are you sure you want to admit that? Which is absurd, because also you're not supposed to be raping people, I'm pretty sure. So,
Goodness.
let's,
Yeah.
but threatening women that if they come forward with that kind of information, like they're hurting their reputation. No, there's rape shield laws. Like, you go into this as a Jane Doe, that wasn't explained. I mean, none of it. It was just, they were basically sent away and told to deal with it. And many of them ended up dropping out, still have mental health issues that they're going to be battling forever. And they might have had that happen anyway, but it's really sad because maybe they wouldn't have if someone would have cared and helped them. And all the while, if you're on the football team and you're one of the people doing this and you're seeing this happen and you're seeing that there's absolutely no backlash for you whatsoever, you just continue to play and get away with anything and do whatever you want. How do you ever stop that? So it just, the culture just grew and grew and grew, that as long as we're winning football games, we're above the law. We participate above the law. We can do whatever we want as long as on that field out there we're winning. And no leadership was stopping that or stepping in and making that different.
I have a lot of thoughts, but I want to stay on track, because it is devastating that the infrastructure and the support wasn't there, especially considering Baylor is a private institution as well. So there's, again, tons of money floating around if they had chosen to use it to support those victims. So eventually Baylor did start to look at what was happening, and they invited a firm called Pepper Hamilton to investigate. What was Pepper Hamilton's role in unveiling more of these claims of harassment?
So early on, right after the initial story ran, is when Baylor Regents hired Pepper Hamilton to come in and do basically a full review of their athletic department. And then it's a law firm in Philadelphia that came in as an outside third party to, be unbiased and look. And they released their findings, which were literally just a list of bullet points. We've never seen a full document of any kind. We've heard different things about this over the years. that it was done orally, so that it wasn't, but if that was the case, we've never seen a recording or heard a recording of it or whatever. So we'll never know everything. Well, someday we'll know, but we don't know everything that was in there. We know
Mhm.
bullet points of their findings, and they were what we just talked about, that the football team was breaking rules, that people in charge were aware of the situation and not acting on it, that football players were being given, special treatment. And from that, Art Briles was fired, and so was Ian McCaw, the athletic director at the time. It later led to Ken Starr, formerly of Bill Clinton fame, then the president of the university, also resigning, but being pushed out. So that's when things, I think, really took off, because the initial reaction of, I would never say of all Baylor fans, obviously, but of a lot of Baylor fans, was that Art Briles was completely innocent, and then everything really spiraled out of control. And that's really when you saw more and more and more victims come forward, because it got very ugly very quickly, because fans were pissed that their coach was fired right when they were on the verge of, being a contender for a championship. And it became really clear that it wasn't just the university, but the university supporters who were okay with winning at any cost.
Yep.
And like I said, not all. I mean, I talked to a ton of Baylor people during this, and it was very mixed. But there was, you know how it is, anytime something happens, there's a certain sector of people that's very loud about
Yep.
how they feel. And you had that. You had them showing up to games, protesting the CAB signs, the Coach Art Briles signs everywhere. And the victim shame and blame went from pretty bad to horrifically bad overnight.
So I have a couple questions. First, as you're reporting, what were your mentions on social media like as someone who was trying to cover it?
Brutal, brutal. I mean, I got like death threats for doing it from Christians, like
Right.
it was awful. It was awful. Um, the whole time though, I just kept telling myself, like, the victims have been through so much worse,
Mhm.
so I will deal with this. But it was incredibly hard. That is a time that, as a reporter, you have to really think about your own mental health. I had to, talk to a therapist and work through some of that, because there is secondhand trauma that comes through reporting on these stories, and not just sexual assault, but people who have to cover mass shootings or wars or anything like that. You take on some of the trauma of the people that you're dealing with. So
Mhm.
it was really hard. And obviously I'm in Houston. People know my face. I was stopped a lot in public to be harassed by Baylor fans. Um, there were a lot of times I didn't feel safe, and it was by far the worst point in my career, but maybe the most important as well, because I really believed that these stories were important to tell. It was important for people to know. Look, I went to a big school. I went to a Big 12 school. I went to Oklahoma, and when I was there, I was a huge football fan. Of course, like, that's what you do when you're there. You go to football games. I know for a fact that I've seen it happen. Like, Joe Mixon happened at Oklahoma while I wasn't there, but I was still a fan.
Mhm.
I will be the first person to be very, to this day, he should have been kicked off that team in a heartbeat. There should have been consequences. I've been on the record saying that a bunch of times. I would say that about anybody at any school, anytime. My loyalty to the university doesn't change. Like, I went to school there. I'm happy I went to school there. I like to see them do good things and win. But I also paid a lot of money to go to school there, and I sure as hell am gonna hold them accountable. And if I see some things that I think aren't right, I feel like, as an alum and a supporter, I should be like, you need to get it together because that is not how I want to be represented. And so to me, I always felt very torn about the Baylor people who were attacking me. That, like I said, small group of them, but loud and passionate group of them.
Right.
To me, it was and brutal. Again, like some of the things, there were people that were like, it was really bad. People saying I should be raped or assaulted for the things I was writing. Like, who says that? Certainly, what Christian says that? Like, that makes you
Right.
question a lot. When you go to their or when you go to their Twitter bio and it's like, Father, Christian, what I'm like, would you want someone saying this to your daughter? Like, are you kidding
Thank
me?
you.
About this is just because of a football team? Like, they're the
Exactly.
ones who did something wrong too. Like, I did nothing wrong. I reported on it. So it was
Right.
really, it really spiraled, not just for me, but for every woman covering it. And it, it's just, I think that was one of those moments for me where I've been a sports writer for 17 years now or whatever. I know how passionate fans are. This was another level of loyalty that makes you realize people are blinded by how much they worship these teams and these players and these coaches. And it's in as much as great as sports are and as fun as sports are, and I believe they have the power to do a lot of good in this world.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a very, very dark side to it, and that was coming out a lot during that period of time while I was covering that story.
I asked that question because I remember you responding to people or like sharing some of the things people were sending you. So in preparation for this conversation, I looked back and you're right. People are making threats or, well, why didn't you say this about this school? Just I'm talking about Baylor right now. That doesn't mean I am not also very angry at the University of
Right.
Oklahoma. Like people can
Or
have
any of them. Yeah,
right.
it's I was reporting on one school at the time, so I felt comfortable as a reporter with the information I had, which as much as I was working on it, to report that information. I don't feel comfortable reporting information on something I haven't spent a moment looking into. I can give you my opinion based on things I've read and seen, but with Baylor, I'm pouring through lawsuits. I'm talking to victims. I was escorted off the campus multiple times by going in to question people there. I was doing that work and I was very well versed in what I was doing. I
Mhm.
spent weeks, hours upon hours upon hours doing the work on that. So I felt very comfortable sharing what I knew to be fact at that point, which is what a reporter should do. Like, I shouldn't
Right.
just be spouting off. I'm not a talking head. I'm not somebody who's just gonna. I have plenty of opinions. I give them to my husband at home. He's probably sick of them. But I mean, for the most part, when I'm doing, I can separate. Like, when it's time to do my job, though, I'm going to do my job. And I had all the knowledge in the world about these cases to feel confident in putting out the information and doing my job. And to this day, by the way, nobody at Baylor, I've given them tons of, and it's all different people now, by the way. Baylor has
Mhm.
done, I will say this, they've done an excellent job revamping everything. They took it very seriously. And I think they should be commended for that, which I have also said on the record a bunch of times. I'm very impressed with how quickly they turn things around, and they do have a great Title IX office now, and there is structure, and I think things are done the right way. So they're an example of how you can get out of this.
Yep.
But at the time, like, I would send stuff to them and be like, is any of this wrong, before I ran it? And
Mhm.
nobody could ever poke any holes in anything I had. No one could ever say, no, we're going to sue you for this if you run it. Like, because everything was bulletproof, because that's the kind of time I spent on the reporting. And so uh, to me, it's also just like people were attacking me for truth. And I understand that sometimes truth hurts. But
Yep.
again, you know, I didn't get anyone fired. I didn't do anything. I didn't assault anyone. I didn't turn away women in need. I didn't make the mistakes. I just reported them and put them out for everybody to see. which I think is important work.
Yeah,
But yeah, it was
absolutely.
super, super dark time for me. Professionally, just so many things.
I have a follow-up question, and I don't want you to throw any employers under the rug, but did you feel supported at the Houston Chronicle as you were writing this?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I think they did what they could. I mean, look, they were
Mhm.
running the work. Um, my colleagues certainly were looking out for me and trying to make sure when they were around me, that I felt protected. But there's really only so much you can do because
Mhm.
the other thing is, what's hard about a story like this is it keeps going and going and going. So stuff keeps coming out, and every time it would, naturally, it would be me to cover it because I was the one with the knowledge on it, and that can be draining. And I know that now as an editor to make sure my writers have like backup plan. Like if you need to step away from this story, you need to do that. But I didn't know as a writer to say that. I felt like this huge responsibility and weight that I had to cover it every single time. But what happens with that is then you end up covering every time there's sexual assault in sports and every time there's domestic assault, everyone's looking at you to do it. And that can be incredibly heavy stuff. So I do wish I would have spoken up a little bit more and been like, I don't need to be the only one covering these things.
Right.
But I certainly don't blame other people for not noticing that. But I would say that now I know that, and that's something that I would push on anybody. Like, make sure you're not pigeonholing certain writers into doing the same work over and over again. Even if they say like they can handle it, when it's heavy stuff like this,
Yeah.
you need to be ready to step in and be like, you need to step away from this for a minute.
That's a really good point. And I wish we had more time because then I would ask you about the Washington Post keeping people from covering stuff if they've been victims of sexual harassment. But Baylor. Baylor is under indictment here and not the
We can
Washington
do we
Post.
can do a whole other session on that. I have a lot of thoughts on that too.
For sure, for sure, for sure. So back to Baylor. You mentioned Ian McCaw, Art Briles, and Ken Starr all gone in the
Right.
aftermath of these discoveries.
Right.
How much did that cost Baylor? Because I know you did an article that Art Briles got like a $15 million settlement.
I'm not sure. I'd have to look what McCall got, and I think because Starr ultimately resigned, I don't know that they owed him anything of much. But the 15 million was bad.
Yeah.
Like it was a slap in the face, certainly, to the victims because, he I get it that he lost a job, and that's a huge consequence. I don't want to act like it's not. But then you get $15 million. And these, again, like several of these women dropped out of school, couldn't hold jobs, like we're dealing with this trauma. And some of the lawsuits, like the details of what happened to them, it's horrifying. They'll never be okay. Like they're always going to have this fear in their mind and this worry, and he's just like, here's $15 million. Like and the other thing was this complete lack of remorse from him. It was always like he never apologized that these things were happening. We saw text messages from him and emails where we knew he knew what was going on and dismissed it. um I just don't know how you do that and never apologize for all these horrible things that happen under your watch. And one of the big arguments I would always get about Briles is, well, he didn't attack anyone, but he also did nothing to make sure that his players weren't. And if you can hear that one of your players you brutally attacked a woman, physically and sexually assaulted a woman, and then never say anything to them, never have a conversation. You're supposed to be a leader of men, teaching them something,
Right.
and say, that's fine, he's still going to play on Saturday. what did that player learn? How are you helping groom this guy in any way into anything other than a little football machine? I mean,
Right.
that's basically what you're telling, and it's sad all the way around too, because it's also, you're basically, if that's how you're treating it for this, like, you're basically telling these players that that's all they're worth is playing football. And that's not what you're supposed to get out of your education either. So it was just that settlement was not great. It was disheartening, certainly. And I still talk to several of the victims that, I covered at the time, and I remember that coming out, and just so much dejection on their end.
Yeah.
They didn't feel like he ever really got punished for what happened to them.
No, I appreciate you throughout this conversation centering the people who have really suffered, not people like Art Briles who, cashed out and walked off campus. And back to your point about whether or not, or his lack of remorse. It was really weird. Again, in preparing for this conversation, he just kind of wiffle waffled a lot about, well, I didn't do anything legally or ethically wrong, but I mean, I was just there. And I think finally, you also mentioned, like, you don't want people to be fired, but like there have to be consequences for the actions for someone somewhere. And unfortunately, or not unfortunately, he's the head. He's in charge, and he's not.
His whole coaching staff probably should have been fired, and the consequence should remain, like, he shouldn't be coaching young men anymore at all. Like, it just shouldn't happen. Like, that's not the person. What we know about him through this is that rules don't matter. And maybe he goes somewhere and coaches, and it's not like all his players are going out and assaulting people, but maybe they're breaking other rules. We know he doesn't care. If you can throw a football, if you can run, if you can tackle, if you can score, that's all that matters to Art Briles and his coaching staff, period. Mm-hmm. That is the culture that he's going to bring anywhere he is. And anyone who says otherwise needs to be able to prove it, because here's what we know is what we can see, and that's it.
Yep. And he ended up at a high school in Texas coaching. Mm-hmm. Some of his staff ended up different programs across the country. Ian McCaw ended up as an athletic director somewhere else.
At Liberty.
Great institution, I'm sure.
Shocker, yeah.
And again, that's the wild part of it. We've not we, you and I, but others have absolved people of their role in this and decided you can still lead an athletic department, you can still lead an offensive line, you can still lead position players or whatever. Not
only do we absolve them, oftentimes it's painted as they've overcome something, some obstacle to be back out there, which is a terrible narrative and a very unhealthy narrative, because they are not the ones who had to get over anything.
Right.
At all. Clearly, their second chance is thrown out a bunch. To truly have a second chance, you have to be sorry for what you did in the first place, and they're not.
Never.
And they get new jobs and they move forward. The victims of the crimes don't. And so when we in the media have that narrative, look what he overcame, look what he was able to do, that is just building up trauma all over again for victims who went through these things.
And maybe we can talk about him a bit at the end, but I was reading about Steve Sarkesian. Sarkesian. And so the article I read was about how he was the best off-season hire. And the first sentence was like, he overcame some personal problems at Southern California, USC. And I was like, did he overcome personal problems? Yes, but were those personal problems abusing alcohol and maybe prescription drugs? Like, you have to tell the whole story. And then if you go back even further, like, he was charging thousands of dollars of alcohol at University of Washington events, and the players were tweeting about they knew he was coming to events drunk. So It's like,
And those your behaviors when you're the person in charge matter. And if you're going to be paid all of this money and you are going to be revered as a role model, I have one son, I'm about to have another son. If I'm going to send my son to your program, I absolutely should be able to hold you accountable and say, if you're doing things that aren't meeting a certain standard, you shouldn't be in that role. And it doesn't, there's so many people that are like, they'll turn it on me. Yeah, if I'm abusing anything as a journalist, if I am misquoting people, if I am running incorrect information and calling it fact, if I'm harassing people online, I should be fired. I
Yes.
should be fired. If you are, yeah, if you're using drugs or showing up to work drunk at your office job, you should be fired. If you're the CEO of a company and a whole bunch of your employees are getting away with assault and you know about it, they and you should all be fired. So why is it different when we get to a football team? Because he can coach?
Someone can
I
throw the
live in
ball real well.
Texas. Yeah, I live in Texas. I'll show you a whole bunch of people who can coach. It's not that, I can throw a rock and hit a coach. This is football country. So you can find another coach and you can find one with some standards and morals. And it's
Yeah.
not that hard to do. You have to look. They keep going through the same pool of guys over and over and over again.
We could do a whole episode on that. I
Yeah.
used to joke that the best jobs in the world are professor or sports coach because you can be terrible, but if you're good for like one season, you can write that for an entire career.
Yeah.
An entire career. And
It's the only profession like that where you can just hop around because your name is already out there. Yeah.
Yep.
It's crazy.
And I was talking to a college coach, different sport, and they were just saying you just have to exhibit some common sense. That's all it takes because there are so many people that don't. Yes, you could definitely throw a rock and hit a coach, throw another rock and hit like a really nice high school football stadium. Those are insane in Texas. Everybody should just Google that.
Yeah.
So we've talked about kind of where everyone landed. And you mentioned in covering this, like you wish you had taken better care of your mental health.
Yeah.
What are some other important things you learned throughout the process, whether it was corresponding with the victims or, trying
Sure.
to keep angry Baylor fans at bay?
I think I learned, well, first of all, on the victim side, I learned how to even talk to any victim, period.
Mm-hmm.
I learned very quickly that you can't do this on a deadline. Like there has to be a relationship and a comfort level. And there's a lot of times when I'm in sports. So if I'm covering an NBA locker room, I'm not going in there to make friends. No offense, I'm not saying that to be cold or anything, but like me and Chris Paul aren't hanging out on Saturday. Like I just need to get what I need from him right then to do my job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. And he and I insert any player into that scenario, we're on the same page with that. I'm there to do my job. He's required to talk to me. Let's make it as pleasant as possible and say goodbye, and that's that. But I'm not, it sounds bad. I don't care about Chris Paul. But I don't. There's not a feeling of like, if he has a bad game, I might be like, well, that sucks. But like he's a professional. He'll get over it. It's fine. Like he's going to be okay. Right. I'm not in there like, oh, do you need some water or something? Like, are you okay, man? Like, I know that was hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different dynamic.
Right.
And if I was like overly caring, I guarantee you the players would be like, what in the world? Like, it would be weird. So it's good that I'm just there in a professional manner to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
When talking to victims, you cannot do that. It is no longer, I'm asking them to share the worst experience of their entire life with me. And I'm asking them to trust me with it, because every time that it's a victim of a crime and, the perpetrator is a professional or a college athlete, I guarantee you the victim has more to lose in the situation than the athlete. The athlete or the coach or whoever probably has a better lawyer. They probably have more resources. They always get the benefit of the doubt. It's always like, no, look at Deshaun Watson right now. It's Deshaun Watson is this great, wonderful guy. There's no way that he's a sexual predator too. Like, that's the first reaction every single time. It's, if their name gets out and the guy is guilty, they're going to be hounded forever.
Yep.
And ever, think about the Kobe Bryant case. Like, her name could not get out, or she would be hiding in a bunker somewhere, because he's worshipped by people. And so it's, you go into it knowing, like, I'm dealing with a person who is in one of the most fragile situations that you can possibly imagine. So you're going to talk to them a lot of times. You're going to make sure that they know that they're cared for. You're going to watch everything that you say and do. And you're going to take the time to get to know them and make it about them and not about the story. And I definitely learned that while I was doing that. In terms of keeping angry fans at bay, you can't. Twitter is awful. And, look, we just know this from social media and people having a place to voice their opinions, which is fine, but you're going to see a lot of stuff you don't like. And I just had to, again, I had to learn to step away sometimes, to stop engaging. I'm never going to change somebody's mind that way. The best thing I could do was do my job correctly, put the facts out there, stand behind my reporting, and hope it helped. And I will say this, I think that over the years, as more and more has come out about that, the perception has changed. If I tweet anything about Art Briles now, it's a whole lot different than when I tweeted it then. There's a lot more people who believe the women and support the women. So, and that is kudos to everybody who's reported these stories over and over again and made sure that the victim stories are showing and being responsible with that information and getting it out there.
For sure. More information has come out. What do you think it'll take for the general public to see the Pepper Hamilton report?
I don't know. I would love to see it though, after all these years. I don't know. I mean, if it's not written down somewhere, surely someone in a room recorded it. I would really like to see it in full. I'll tell you that. I think the findings were useful and thorough. I mean, I think we got a lot out of them, and it obviously sent everything in motion more than anything else could have. But yeah, I would love to see it. I would love to see, like, word for word.
Same.
Someday I bet we will.
I can't wait. So that's Baylor. That's what happened at Baylor University, as through the eyes of Jenny Dial Creech. What's the solution? How do we keep something like what happened at Baylor from happening at other campuses? But before you answer, I do want to say, like, this wasn't a situation unique to Baylor. This happens at
LSU is going through it right now. Yeah.
Yeah. It's when I was at the University of Pittsburgh, not even very good at football. So many incidents with the college football team.
The Stanford swimming guy. There's a ton of these.
Yeah. So even a couple weeks ago, a young lady at A&M was raped by someone, I think, on the swimming and diving team, and he was suspended for like maybe a semester or a term, and then was allowed to come back and join the team. What's the solution? How can we better protect students female students, how do we keep coaches from leaving toxic situations to go foment another toxic situation? What do you think that looks like?
A few ways. I mean, one, I think it would be really awesome for the NCAA to actually get involved, and they're not. I mean, I think it's absurd that eligibility can be, tied to somebody buying you a cheeseburger when they're not supposed to, but you can rape somebody and the NCAA is like, well, we don't deal with that. Tie eligibility to behavior. I think, why wouldn't you? It's a privilege to earn a scholarship and play a sport. Like, your character matters too. I do think too, like, this is all trickle down. So if you're not getting away with this stuff in high school, you're not going to try it in college. So I think high school coaches, who I think are the greatest people in the world, honestly, like, I think high school coaches are truly amazing people, like, with
Mm-hmm.
everything. Like, they don't have the resources that college coaches do. They bring people together better than anyone can. Like, a college or a high school locker room in any sport is a sight to see, getting so many different kids to come together for one common goal. I give them all the credit in the world. And I hate to put more on them, but put it on the high school coaches, like, teach those morals and ethics at that level.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, at the college level, I just don't care how good you are. If you're running a dirty program, if you get hired by another program, the cycle continues. So, real consequences, if for players too, real consequences. If assault somebody, you're done. That's it. And maybe you get another chance somewhere in community college and you get to come back or whatever, but these schools who are like, he's a good kid who made one mistake, guess what? If that kid had to think twice and had to go, man, when my teammate did this, he got kicked off the team, I guarantee you more kids would think twice before they
Yeah.
did something. But they don't have to ever think that, because no one ever gets kicked off. If all you're thinking is, this might be a hassle, but I'll get my second chance, you're going to go through with that behavior 90% of the time.
Yeah,
So
that's a good way
real
to think about it.
consequences, I think, matter. And then, like I said, I'd love to see the NCAA actually tie eligibility to behavior.
Yeah, I know. I like that. Is it a hassle or is it like a career ending? And I think
Yeah.
that's an excellent way to frame it.
I mean, you're going to look, if you look at the time guys and girls spend in the gym to make sure their bodies are okay, because they know, if my knee goes, I'm done. Well, think about the time you would spend on your behavior if you knew, if I go to this party tonight and I get myself in a compromising position and I do something stupid, I'm done. You would think twice about doing that.
As someone who is rehabbing a knee injury sustained while playing basketball with the 10-year-old, I think that's an excellent analogy.
Yeah.
What about for the coaches themselves? Like, there are consequences for the players, but coaches being able to move freely. I think that's a big issue.
It is. It is. I mean, I think, like, you see a lot of guys jump ship and then, like, a year or two later there's NCAA violations. So
Yeah.
I think too, like, tie some of those violations to the individual. If you were there at the time, your new school could suffer too, because then whoever hired you is going to have to think twice about looking into your background a little bit further. We see coaches hired all the time, and they were never vetted.
Yes.
Like, every one of those Baylor assistants that was hired, one of them was hired at the University of Houston, and I saw the interview notes and they were scribbled on a sheet of paper. Nobody vetted anybody. Nobody went and talked to victims of crimes that happened under this guy. They were like,
Mm-hmm.
he's a really good offensive mind. Let's hire him. It took
Yep.
about probably 20 minutes to make that decision. if more people had been involved, he doesn't get hired there. There's no way, because if you actually went through the process. So I think rather than, hey, this big name is available, let's take some time and actually vet this guy. Let's talk to not only the people who love and think he's wonderful, but maybe some of the people he's wronged and have been involved in some of the mistakes that he's made. And let's decide if he's worth a chance then, if he's worth our reputation, if we should put ourselves on the line.
Or if not, you get Les Miles 2 years later, 2 great seasons of football in Kansas later.
Yep, exactly. Perfect example.
Yeah.
And the sad thing about that is we could sit here and list 20 of those without thinking very hard, because it's the same. They just keep recycling the same troublemakers over and over and over again, just transplanting them to other places.
And like you said, the NCAA doesn't want to get involved.
But the NCAA could be a whole other episode too. There's a lot.
Yeah, they're going through it. Even today, before I checked our favorite cesspool Twitter, Justice Clarence Thomas was saying, why are these coaches getting paid so much? I think this might be the first time I've ever agreed with that guy. So
I know there was a few of the justices I was following earlier, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm surprised that you're asking something that makes a lot of sense.
Yep. And like in language I understand, Supreme Court is going to be must watch. Well, Jenny, that's it. Thank you so much for providing some illumination on what happened at Baylor, why it happened, how you've been supporting victims and doing the due diligence to report the facts as they happened at Baylor, and as we've discussed in the last few minutes, at campuses across the United States. So, where can people find you on the internet?
I'm still on Twitter, amazingly, after all these years. Just at Jenny Dial Creech. And I do try to engage with people now. I do it less, but I still do. And then I am an editor for the Athletic NBA, which I think is just a phenomenal group of writers that I love working with. So if you're a basketball fan, I highly recommend following on Twitter at the Athletic NBA or grabbing a subscription, and you'll just there's very few places that cover basketball better. So if you're a hoop head, it's a great place to be. Final question. When do you think the Rockets will have a winning season again? I hope soon. I actually really like the new coach. I feel like he was just put into a bad situation. I'd love to see him succeed because I do think he's a great guy. And I don't know if it'll be next year, maybe the year after. But yeah, I'd like to see that happen. I do think he has a great offensive mind, and just really came into a poor situation with a lot of turnover. And so I think when he can actually have an off season and some time to establish something, I think that he can do really good things here. I hope he gets that shot. Same. That 20-second pause at his last press conference after loss 20, that was rough. But to your point, tough situation. So hopefully he gets the players and personnel and support from ownership, management, whatever. But that was for me personally to kind of keep me calm as a Houston sports fan. Jenny, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Thanks again to Jenny for joining me on this episode of That Can't Be Right. College football coaches, get your shit together. Check out the episode description for links to The Athletic, Jenny's Twitter, and maybe some articles about my very prolific high school basketball career. And then for funsies, everybody go check and see if a college coach is the highest paid public official in your state. Make sure this app is downloading new episodes of That Can't Be Right as soon as they release. And let me know what you think about the episode at TCBRPod on Twitter and Instagram. Finally, if there's something that you think can't be right, send me an email. That can't be right podcast at gmail.com. Go sports balls.